All right, I'm in Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1. I'm spending some time in verse 4. In verse 4, it says, "Just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love." And I was spending some time talking about this idea of him choosing us. And I explained that my position is that he chose people by defining the criteria by which a person can be saved, by saying, this is the kind of person who I am willing to have in my life, and that kind of person was defined by the gospel, a kind of person who would respond positively to the gospel. And you've probably noticed that most people reject the gospel. That's just not the kind of person that God wants to have in his life. So he defines a group of people in that sense. He chose us. He chose the church. He chose the body of believers, the people who would embrace the good news, the gospel that he presented. And so out of that, he gets a lot of individuals, different kinds of individuals in the sense that we're different people, but what we do share in common is that we want to know our God. We want to be in a relationship with him. We are a certain type of person who wants to know the truth, who wants to live in reality, who does not want to live in denial of reality. These are qualities, these are characteristics of a certain kind of person. And then we decide if we are going to enter into the relationship that he has made available. It is a mutual decision, a mutual choice. It's not like we decide that God is going to let us into his home, and it's not like he is going to say, you are going to be in my home whether you like it or not. This is a mutual decision. This is a healthy, real, genuine relationship. All right, now at the end of the previous message, what I was doing was I was beginning to get into some of the history regarding the predominant belief. Most people believe that God decides on an individual basis who is going to be saved and who is not going to be saved, who's going to go to hell. Most people believe that. And I gave 5 different reasons why most people would like to believe that this is the case. Just to give an example, and of course just to show that I have put a lot of thought into this, that I've had a lot of conversations with many people regarding this topic. All right, now I was getting into the history of the development of this philosophical belief as I was addressing point number 5 in the previous message of theology. That a reason, one of the reasons why people would like to believe that God chooses specific individuals over other individuals is from a theological point of view. So I explained that the history of this, in terms of how well it's been documented, goes back to the days of Greek philosophy, pagan Greek philosophy, of the days of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. This is when it was well documented. Now, I, of course, do believe that this belief system existed before them. I have lots of reasons as to why I would believe that that is the case. I have that belief that it existed in a lot of people's minds, in their hearts, and in their belief systems. This is something that has always been in existence in one form or another. It just depends on who you're talking with, again. All right? But it was here that it was well codified and it was well defined through Plato and through Aristotle. The pagan Greek philosophy, was something that existed for a long period of time before Jesus came on the scene and presented the new covenant. It was a philosophy that existed when Israel was a nation and was living under the old covenant. I think the most significant interaction that took place, that was a conflict between pagan Greek philosophy and the Jews, took place in the 2nd century BC. In the 2nd century BC, you had a king by the name of Antiochus, Antiochus IV, and he was in power in that part of the world that also included the land of Israel at this time in the 2nd century BC. He had authority over that region. And one of the decisions that he made while he was ruling was that he wanted all of the people who were under his jurisdiction to share a common philosophy, to share a common belief system, to have a similar outlook on life, to try to unify the people under the basis of pagan Greek philosophy. He got this idea from his forefather Alexander the Great, who expressed that this was something that he had an interest in. He was never able to really pursue it, but he thought that perhaps he could unify the people who were under his authority through pagan Greek philosophy. It was Antiochus IV who actually made a good try at it, who made a good attempt. But the problem was that the Jews were not willing to embrace pagan Greek philosophy from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. They were not interested in that because it was incompatible with the God of Israel. All right? The God of Israel was a participant in their lives. He was not somebody who controlled every aspect of their lives. They were responsible for the decisions that they made. God was making decisions as well, and that they were participating with one another under the conditions of the covenant that God established through their forefathers, known as the Law of Moses. When the Greeks went into the land of Israel and they informed the population that they wanted the people there to embrace pagan Greek philosophy, the people, of course, would not cooperate because the God that was presented through pagan Greek philosophy, that was also presented as a number of gods, but the philosophical thought, the view of who God really is, just simply is not compatible with the God of the Bible. And so the Jews just would not cooperate. They would not comply. And eventually, Antiochus IV decided to impose many laws to try and oppress those who believed in the God of Israel. And eventually, through all of the pressure that they were placed under, there was a revolt and there was a war. There was a war. This was known as the Maccabean Wars. But fundamentally, what the Maccabean Wars were about they were about the rejection of pagan Greek philosophy and of the gods of the Greeks. It was a religious, theological conflict. All right? That's mainly what it was. It was a theological conflict, and the Jews fought a war over this issue. Okay? Now, you wait another 200 years later, a little bit less than that, and now you've got Jesus, who has died and he is resurrected from the dead. And the gospel is now going out from the Jewish world into the rest of the world, mainly through the ministry of the Apostle Paul, but through many others as well. And there are people in the Gentile world who are hearing about Jesus, and they begin to figure out how to assimilate the gospel into their philosophies that they already have. How are they going to incorporate or assimilate the God of the Bible into their philosophical beliefs? All right? And most of the early church fathers were people who were Gentiles who were trying to find a way to harmonize their belief systems that they had, which were effectively pagan Greek philosophical belief systems. They were trying to incorporate that, merge that somehow with the Bible. And, and that was an opportunity for a lot of discussion and a lot of writing and a lot of presentations on how to address these kinds of issues. Eventually, of course, because most of the people who became Christians were non-Jews, they were people who were a part of this paganistic Greek philosophical world. And so this belief became predominant within the church as a whole. eventually, after a couple hundred years, this was presented as Catholicism, is what that became. Catholicism was a hybridization of, it was a combination, a merging of pagan Greek philosophy with the Bible, and that the Bible would be interpreted on the basis of pagan Greek philosophy. But it wasn't just the Catholic Church. It was many other people in the surrounding communities and areas who didn't even really identify themselves in that way. But I'm just giving you an example of something that you can look at, refer to, and study, and see why is it that they're close to the Bible, but they're still quite far away, and who is the God that they really believe in? How would they describe the God that they believe and trust in? And you'll find that it's for the most part, it's pagan Greek philosophy that has been superimposed onto the scriptures, onto the Bible. Or another way to say it is that they read the Bible through the lens from the point of view of the pagan Greek philosopher. All right. Now, this philosophy is something that the Jews fought a war over. All right. And now this is the predominant belief system that you see within Christianity. And it's always been this way. And it probably always will be. That in most, not all, but in most of Christianity, in the Christian world, you will find people who have beliefs that somewhat conform to these pagan Greek philosophical points of view. It's just that most people don't know it because, of course, they don't study pagan Greek philosophy, and so they don't have an opportunity really to see the similarities and to understand the similarities in terms of what people are really believing and why. All right. Now, what happened later on was that there was a person, and I mentioned this briefly in the previous message, there was a person, his name was Augustine, who pretty much codified a lot of the belief systems, a lot of the beliefs in this system of beliefs, that established certain definitive characteristics of God according to the church as a whole. All right, this was Augustine, and he is well described as the most influential Christian theologian of all time. All right, now the only reason why he is the most influential Christian theologian of all time is because more people have listened to him and have learned from him and have subscribed to his beliefs than anybody else. All right, so it's just a popularity description. That's all it is. Oh, he's the most influential. Well, why? Because he's very popular. And why would he be so popular? Because what he taught was compatible with what most people believe. Most people, when they think about a God, they have certain ideas about who he quite likely is, what they would expect him to be, who they would expect him to be, and how they would expect him to relate to us as people. All right, and these are philosophical views that I presented in the previous message as campfire theology. If you get enough people together and they ask each other the question, if there was a God, what would he be like? Just from a general, thoughtful, fleshly point of view, what would people come up with? And the descriptions that people generally come up with can be quite compatible enough that they fit in really well with the pagan Greek philosophy that was embraced by people such as Augustine, and he just simply did a more formal, condensed presentation of what it means to be a Christian, what it means to believe in your God and who your God is from this point of view. All right, and so if you check just about any encyclopedia, any article that has been written on Augustine, then you'll find that it's very clear and it's open. This is not a secret. I'm not just pulling this out of my own opinion. You can read just about any article about Augustine, and they explain this, that he was the most influential theologian of all time, and it was because he found a way to hybridize or fuse or merge together the beliefs of Platonic thought, all right, pagan Greek philosophy with the Bible. Putting those two things together gave a presentation of a God that most people would like to have. All right, the kind of God who will just simply decide for you if you're going to go to heaven or if you're not. You know, that kind of a God, the kind of God who has control over absolutely everything, who, you know, such that there is no maverick molecule in the universe. You know, if he doesn't, well, then what kind of God is that, right? You know, this is how people will think from a natural point of view, you know, using just regular natural thoughts and decisions. And people just assume that this is self-evident, all right? That he's a God who has to know everything. You know, well, I can show you examples in the scriptures where there are things that he doesn't quite know. I mean, consider what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, for example. He went and he had a conversation with Abraham that he was there to investigate what was going on. He himself didn't even go. He sent a couple of angels to go in there. He stayed back. He stayed out of town on the outskirts. All right? So he knows anything that he wants to know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to know everything, because there probably are some things he'd just rather not know. You know, just to give you an example, is he everywhere? Again, I just gave you a description of, well, you know, he presented himself in a way that he was separated from what was going on there. All right, so this is just an example. I mean, there could be a lot of discussion when it comes to this. But see, there's an assumption that people make about God because it just seems right. You know, it seems right. But folks, this doesn't make it right. You know, it just doesn't. If we were, you know, if we were so enlightened that we could come to conclusions such as this, I suppose that the world would not be in as much difficulty as it really is, wouldn't you? I mean, you know, all right, and that people would know their God, but they don't. All right, so this is the history of this belief system. All right, and then there was the Protestant Reformation. All right, where there were a group of people who decided to protest a number of things that were being pressed upon them by the Catholic Church. They decided to protest those things because they weren't true. You know, they just weren't. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to protest everything that's not true. There were just a number of things that they identified that they discovered were not true, and they protested those things. Doesn't mean they protested everything. You know, it was just a good start. And then, of course, later on, they forgot what they were protesting, so they became Protestants. But they had their own guy. All right, their own guy who presented pagan Greek philosophy through the scriptures. All right, and his name was Calvin. And if you study through the writings of Calvin, you will find that he stated clearly that everything that Augustine believed, he believed the same thing. He was just the Protestant version of Augustine. All right, it's just the Protestant version of that, of presenting a God who has his foundation and his definition in pagan Greek philosophy. All right, and so that has been somewhat the history of these philosophical principles in the church. All right, and so that's what I see. You know, this is what I have discovered, and that is my explanation as to, you know, why I take a different point of view and why it is different, because I do see that we have a God who is relational and that he wants to have relational experiences with his creation. He's interested in having people in his life who are in his life because they want to be, not just because they exist, all right? Because he created them. It's not just about that. When he created this world to begin with, he created two people. He created Adam and Eve, and they clearly did not have too much of an option concerning whether or not they were going to enter into a relationship with him. They were just right there, you know. He created them, put them in his garden, and he interacted with them. They did not have that decision, that point of decision where they would decide that they wanted to be in the garden, that they would decide that they would want to converse with this God, where they would decide that they would want to get to know him. They didn't have that opportunity. They had the opportunity of rejecting him. That was their opportunity, and they did. And that was the end for them. They were out, and they never returned. That was it. But that got something started. Now we have new people who are going to be born into this world in the image of Adam, and they're going to be born in this world spiritually dead. Now, God obviously knew that this was going to happen. It would happen eventually, if not with Adam and Eve, if they had children. Somebody's going to violate the law and somebody's going to eat from the wrong tree. This is going to happen. It just so happens that it happened with Adam and Eve. But eventually it would happen with somebody. Somebody's going to eventually eat from that tree that he declared would cause spiritual death. And so it was just a matter of time before this would take place. I'm confident in saying that. I really do believe that it would just be a matter of time, and that God knew that this was going to be the case. So when he created the world and created humanity, he did so knowing that there would be a rejection of him at some point in some way, that there would be a rejection of him as a person, and that he would eventually then offer a way for people to be redeemed, for people to then enter into a relationship with him, to accept him under his terms, who would enter into this relationship with him because they want to, not because they have to or because it was just part of their existence, but because they would have some time, they would have some time in the world without him. And that's what happens with everybody. Everybody's born into this world without their God. And they would be able to live their lives without him, being in a condition of being spiritually dead, without their God, without knowing who he is. They would be able to enjoy some time in the world without separated from their God, so that they would know, at some point, they would know, hopefully, that they would not want to stay in that condition. That they would eventually come to the point of recognizing that there hopefully is something better than who they are and the world that they're a part of. And that they would respond to God's invitation to be a part of his life. All right, so this is what he would get. He would get a group of people, some people, who would know what they do not want. All right, and after spending enough time in the world, just about anybody can say, this is definitely not heaven. It just isn't. There must be something better than this. There must be more to life than just this. There's got to be something. I hope there's something, and it's through that interest, through that discovery, that we will pursue a knowledge and understanding of our God. So who does he get? He will get those few people who will follow through with that well enough, far enough. He will get those few people who want to know him for who he really is, and who want to have a relationship with him because they know the alternative already and they just don't want it anymore. That's a different kind of person than he would get compared with Adam and Eve, who he just created and just put there. All right, he gets a different kind of person, and this kind of person, I don't think he could have this kind of a person any other way. I don't know how it could be done. I really don't. And I've put a lot of thought into it. I just don't think that there is any other way that he could get these kinds of people in his life besides this. And it's a limited amount of time. This is happening between the time, mainly, if I was to just focus on the new covenant, this is happening between the time of Jesus' resurrection and whenever he returns, which supposedly is not going to be much longer from now. He's coming back one day. I personally think he's going to wait as long as he can until the world enters into such absolute chaos that there just isn't any alternative, that there just won't be another generation. So why wait? Okay, let's end it now. That's my personal belief, and I don't think in my day and age right now we're quite there yet. Perhaps in another generation or two. I don't know, but what I do know is that he's coming back, and when he does, that's going to be the end. That's going to be the end of him having these kinds of people come into his life. All right, so this foreknowledge of knowing that there would be a rejection. He designed a solution for this problem before he even created the world. That's what we have in verse 4. All right, in verse 4, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4, just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. All right, and I'll go on to the rest of this verse in just a moment. He chose us in him before the foundation of the world. Now, most people want to believe that he chose the individuals, and I don't believe that. I believe that he chose a certain kind of person. Who did he choose? He chose the kind of person who would respond to the gospel. All right, that's the kind of person that he chose. So before the foundation of the world, he said, this is the gospel. This is the solution I'm going to offer. And through that, by default, he is choosing the people who would be willing to respond. All right, that is the choice. It is his choice to define the gospel, to define the covenant. It is our choice to respond positively to the gospel, to the covenant. So this becomes a mutual decision. All right, he chooses us, and in a sense, we choose him. All right, so this is a mutual relationship between two different persons. All right, and knowing that this was going to be a problem, because it's that you don't have to be God to figure that out. Somebody's eventually going to eat from the wrong tree. Just wait. How many thousand years would it take before the probability shows itself? Somebody's going to do it, and when that happens, then we begin. And then now we've got things in motion, and eventually he would provide for redemption for these people, and then we would have this moving along. All right, so he chose us as a collective. He chose us as a collective. We as individuals respond and then enter into an individual relationship with him. So the individual relationship with God begins upon salvation. That's when the individual relationship begins. When you are made into a living person, you're made into a new creation, you are made into a child of God. Before that, there is no relationship in that sense. Okay, continuing into the second part of verse 4, who is blessed, verse 4, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love. All right, now how is it that we are going to be holy and without blame before him in love? How is that going to happen? That is a new subject. I'm going to have to pause on this one and get into the subject of holiness in the next message. For this purpose, I'm just going to bring closure to this topic of choosing us before the foundation of the world, and just give you a little bit of an introduction to the idea of holiness and blamelessness, just in order to give you something to think about until you hear the next message. All right. Now, what most people are thinking of when it comes to this is they're thinking of, well, what are the things that I must do, or what are the things that I need to make sure that I don't do so that I can be holy? I've asked people about this before. I've asked pastors, well, what do you suppose would be the first thing that we ought to teach a new believer, a person who first comes to know the Lord? How should we approach discipleship? How do you think how do you decide to try to approach that? And I've had many tell me that the approach that needs to be taken is to teach them holiness, to teach them how to be holy. And what does that eventually become? It becomes a life of living under a system of law. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're not supposed to do. Make sure you do what you're supposed to do and don't do those things you're not supposed to do, and that is holy. That is holiness. So if God chose us in him before the foundation of the world that we might be holy, then he has decided to receive a certain kind of person into his life so that we would then do what's right and not do what was wrong, as if that is the priority. Now, folks, if that's the case, no one's going to be holy, because no one is going to fulfill those requirements to the standard that God would require in order to define holiness. I mean, you've got to be God himself in order to live that way. So in order for there to be the existence of holiness, it's going to have to take place. It's going to have to happen under some different conditions, under some different criteria. There has to be another way besides our behavior that holiness can be defined. There will have to be another way. And that's what I'll get into in the next message. All right, now for those of you who are using this for your small groups, I do not have a question to facilitate some discussion for this message. Instead, I've talked about probably one of the most popular Christian theological concepts. I think that this is an opportunity for you guys to just go ahead and speak with each other about some of the issues, some of the things you believe, and how there can be some discomfort or some confusion or some uncertainty or some disagreement, concerning the point of view that I have presented as a relational God instead of a controlling God. That this is a different kind of God that most people generally believe in. Most people are believing in this God, again, because it is compatible with a lot of beliefs that people have, such as providence and destiny. Destiny is a big concept in a lot of different cultures, that a lot of people really like the belief system of destiny. But I just don't see that there is a definitive destiny, outside of entrance into the kingdom of heaven for those who will repent and believe the gospel. There is no such thing as people would like to see. And so this is a difficult subject. You'll probably find a lot of controversy in your group. So I'm not going to present a question in this message for you to facilitate a discussion, because I suspect you already have a lot of things that you're going to want to talk about. All right. So I will continue in the next message. Thank you.